Welcome back to Kevin Makes Cool Things. I'm Kevin, and today I'm making Kamish's runestone from the solo leveling manhwa. This project has had its ups and downs. Mostly downs if I'm being honest. Let's dive in and I'll show you what I mean. The first step on all of my projects is finding or creating a good reference image. I started with this picture from chapter 170. It's at a bit of an angle, so I cleaned this up and turned it into this. Right now, this is perfectly symmetrical, which I don't love, but I'll add some variation to both sides when I'm doing the modeling. I didn't always realize how big this thing is supposed to be. I've actually wanted to make this for quite a while, and I've had a number of requests for it in the comments section, but I was holding off until I had my resin printer online. For some reason, I remembered this being maybe 4 inches long, which is roughly what the other runestones are, and I wasn't sure that my normal FFF printer could handle all the small spikes and details. It wasn't until I was going through the manhwa for another project, maybe a couple of months ago, that I noticed this thing is supposed to be like 3 feet tall. I'm definitely going to be scaling it down so it's more manageable, but my normal printer should have no issues. The dimensions I'm aiming for are about 300 millimeters tall and 190 millimeters wide, or around 12 by 8 inches. This is significantly larger than the other runestones I've made in past, for a really good reason. This project is the successor to a video I did in September 2021, when I made the stealth runestone and embedded a blue EL panel inside of it so it actually glowed. It was a cool project, but I'm not totally happy with the results. The main issue is that the print was too small. I had to cut up the EL panel to fit it in there, which will cause it to degrade over time, and I had to run the wires out the back since the battery pack was too big to fit inside. The Kamish runestone is large enough that I can put the entire EL panel and battery pack in there. The panel is 105mm on a side, and the battery pack is 20mm thick. So I made 110 by 110 by 24mm space to give myself some breathing room because I was worried about this not all fitting. Modeling was really frustrating and took way longer than I planned. I've done a lot of scales for my various daggers and figured that a crystal stone-like material would be even simpler. Boy, was I wrong. I'm not super happy with the results, but I can live with it. I've made peace with never being fully satisfied with my models. As I get better, I keep attempting more ambitious projects, so I'm generally tackling new challenges and making exciting new mistakes. Speaking of mistakes, I made a big one when dividing this up for printing. I expected the slicer to put supports under all of the overhanging areas, but it only put a couple of supports in here and tried to handle the rest with bridging. The top surface looked pretty good, but there was a lot of drooping filament underneath. Once everything was printed, I started peeling off the supports. I'm using end cutting pliers for this, which are really handy. I do kinda wish these were about twice the size, so it could grab a little bit more. I was fairly careful at this stage. It's not like I'm gonna lose a finger doing this, but these supports can be deceptively sharp, and it's easy to scratch up your knuckles. The process I use for finishing all of my prints, which you're probably tired of hearing me narrate, is to do a round of rough sanding with my Dremel tool, then apply wood filler, sand it off, apply a coat of spray-on sandable primer, and then repeat. I either do this until the print is up to my exacting standards, or until I run out of time and need to move on to hit my monthly deadline. The only thing notable about this step was that because of the way I divided this up, I did have some decent gaps between the pieces. I had the bright idea to use hot glue to fill this in, so the wood filler had something supporting it. I attached the EL panel and battery pack with some more hot glue. I neglected to clear out all of the drooping filament, so I didn't think 2-part epoxy would get a good grip on this. I was kinda worried as I saw how things were coming together, but I figured it would be fine, since I had given myself some extra space to work with. Things really hit the fan when I put the two sides together. I ended up clamping things in place and praying that it would work. It's around 8:30 in the morning on Saturday, and generally at this point the project is either complete or I'm applying a final coat of spray-on sealer. The video is typically nearly done, and I just have a couple of hours of minor editing before I can post it online. This time around, I'm trying... Okay, that was not expected, but yeah. This time around, I have not even started the video, and I am trying to figure out some way to salvage this. Hopefully, I managed to get a video posted on Sunday. This has so not gone the way I expected. I think the problem was that during the design phase, I lulled myself into a false sense of security by measuring everything out and giving myself a few extra millimeters to work with. When I was cleaning up these pieces after printing, I should have been much more aggressive about cleaning up the dangling pieces of filament from the failed bridging attempts. When I was trying to figure out a way to fill the gaps between these pieces, I used hot glue, which made it easier to apply wood filler, but did eat into the little bit of wiggle room I gave myself. The kiss of death was trying to put in the EL panel. I didn't get it forward nearly as much as I should have. By the time I realized, the hot glue had already dried, and I couldn't really remove it without destroying the EL panel and or this print, so I was kind of stuck. I used every clamp I could to try to get this to glue properly. I'm about to take the stuff off and really hope that I can salvage this with some wood filler. As you probably guessed, I couldn't find a way to salvage it. I opted to just reorder the parts and start over. I ended up buying a different size of EL panel. The one I purchased previously was out of stock, and this size seemed like it was a better fit for what I was doing. I started remodeling this from scratch, and managed to address a lot of the things that bugged me about my last attempt. I didn't even try to do hard crystal-like surfaces, and instead went for the curving scales that I'm more familiar with from my past daggers. The look isn't as new or interesting as I was hoping for, but I managed the execution much better. I divide the model into 6 pieces for printing, so that the front and back face were done as a single print. This was obvious in hindsight from my first attempt. This project got even worse while I was waiting for the printing to finish. I was standing around while my printer finished the last few layers, and I picked up one of these prints and started picking at the supports. Remember earlier in the video when I mentioned you could scratch up your fingers? It can get a lot worse than that. While I was absentmindedly picking at this, a piece that was maybe 3 millimeters long flicked off and got in my eye. I tried to blink it out, which is what you're supposed to do, and it immediately went under my eyelid. I spent the next 15 minutes flushing my eye with water and trying to get this piece out, while my wife stood beside me and alternated between reading me first aid instructions and Googling the nearest urgent care. Eventually it did come out, and it wasn't terribly painful, but it was incredibly uncomfortable. I've learned my lesson, and I ordered a whole bunch of pairs of safety glasses which are now strewn throughout my workspace, so whenever you see me doing anything that's more involved than applying acrylic paints, I'm going to be wearing eye protection. Still, given how this project had gone so far, it really felt like a kick while I was down. I used 2-part epoxy to attach the EL panel to the front face, and it went so much better than last time. I attached the front and back panel and started applying wood filler. To get everything to fit, I did have to sand the edges, so there were some significant gaps I needed to fill. I did the normal sanding process which I described earlier, until I ran out of time. I started by painting this a grayish color. After a few coats, I absolutely hated how it looked. I watched some tutorials on painting terrain, and started to feel really inadequate about my painting technique. I normally make jokes about it, since I know it's not that great, but after watching some proper tutorials with washes and dry brushing, I started to develop a borderline complex about this. I somehow managed to salvage this by applying a darker coat and then lightly brushing on a lighter coat and wiping off the excess with a paper towel. I had a random idea to mix normal matte gray paint with some folk art silver, which gave this a dull sheen which worked way better than I expected. Dumb luck saves the day yet again. I applied a coat of spray-on matte sealer and it was done. It looks surprisingly good. The glow isn't very obvious under the lights I normally use for filming, but under more regular lighting conditions, it really pops. As I wrap up this project, I'm conflicted. I've made other runestones before, and I was expecting this to be more of a victory lap than an actual challenge. Between the fiasco that was version 1 and the thing with the eye on version 2, I don't think this is going to be something I look back on fondly. In spite of that, I am quite happy with the results. If you enjoyed this video, then go ahead and give it a like or leave me a comment. If you like my work and want to see what else I come up with, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I'll be back next month with another project, so until then,